An ordinary Saturday. I arrived at 1624 Maple Avenue a little earlier than usual. The morning fog still lingered outside, and the asphalt was damp from the night's rain. The house smelled of coffee and something sweet, as if someone had just taken buns out of the oven. I took off my jacket, changed into the soft slippers I always bring with me, and glanced around the living room. Children's toys scattered on the floor, a blanket on the couch, and yesterday's cake leftovers on the table. In the corner stood a large vase with wilted roses, and I thought that someone here liked to pretend there was always a celebration in the house. I started with the kitchen. It's the easiest way to get into the rhythm. The water in the sink was still warm. Someone had just washed the dishes. I turned on the radio on my phone so I wouldn't hear the silence and got to work. A few minutes later, he walked into the kitchen, the man of the house, tall, slightly tousled hair, gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked like he'd just woken up, but already had a cup of coffee in his hand. "Good morning," he said, smiling. "You're early today." "Good morning," I replied, trying not to look him in the eye. "I just decided to start earlier so I can finish everything before lunch." He nodded, took a sip of coffee, and leaned against the doorframe. "If you need anything, just ask," he said. "I'm home today. I can help." "Thank you," I replied, "but I'll manage. You should relax." He smirked, and there was something familiar in his gaze, a light irony, as if he knew I wasn't just lingering in the kitchen. I felt my cheeks flush and turned back to the sink. "It's always so clean here," he noted, "even after parties." "Habit," I said. "I like everything in its place." "That's a rare quality," he said, and I heard him step closer. "My wife says I always leave things everywhere." I smiled without turning around. "Men often do that," I said, "but sometimes it's even cute." He laughed, and I felt the tension between us become almost tangible. I didn't know what to say next, so I just kept washing the dishes, and he stayed nearby, watching me. "Have you worked for this company long?" he asked after a pause. 8 years now," I replied. "I've gotten used to different houses, different people." "You must have seen a lot of interesting things," he said, and there was a hint in his voice. "Sometimes," I answered, "but I don't like to gossip." He smiled, and I sensed he was waiting for something more from me. Maybe a story, maybe a confession. But I stayed silent, just dried my hands on a towel, and turned to him. "If you want, I can make you breakfast," he offered unexpectedly. "Thank you," I said. "But I can't get distracted. If I start eating, I won't be able to stop." He laughed, and I noticed his gaze lingered on my hands as I tucked my hair behind my ear. "Are you always this serious?" he asked. "Only at work?" I replied, smiling. He nodded, as if he understood something important, and left the kitchen, leaving behind the scent of coffee and men's cologne. I was alone, but the feeling of his presence didn't disappear. I caught myself waiting for him to come back, enjoying his attention, his light jokes, his gaze. I couldn't explain why it was so important to be noticed, to be heard, even if just for a few minutes. When I finished in the kitchen, he appeared again, this time in the living room where I was picking up toys. "Do you have kids?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the couch. "Yes, a son," I replied. "He's 7. "So you know what it's like to clean up after a little hurricane?" he said, smiling. "I do," I answered, "but sometimes I think adults leave more mess than kids." He laughed, and I felt that same tension arise between us again, light, almost invisible, but very real. You're right, he said. We all act like kids sometimes. I smiled, and for a moment our eyes met. I felt something stir inside, as if I was standing on the edge of something new, unknown. At that moment his wife returned home, and the atmosphere changed immediately. I became invisible again, just the cleaning lady doing her job. But inside I was left with the feeling that this day was different from all the others. I gathered my things, said goodbye, and stepped outside. On the porch I paused for a second, glanced back at the house, and smiled to myself. Sometimes all it takes is a look, a smile, to make a day special. I didn't know what would happen next, but somehow I was sure this story was just beginning. A week passed. I found myself at 1624 Maple Avenue again. This time it was sunny, and the house looked especially welcoming. Windows wide open, children's sneakers on the porch, and somewhere in the yard a little girl was laughing. I entered quietly, as usual, so as not to disturb anyone. In the hallway, the lady of the house greeted me. She smiled, said she was taking her daughter to an activity, and asked me not to forget to water the flowers in the living room. I nodded, wished her a good day, and was left alone. The house was surprisingly peaceful. I turned the music down low so I could hear if anyone came back, and got to work. At some point, I noticed a note on the kitchen table. Laura, if you have time, please help with the garage. Thanks, Tom. I smiled. Tom, that's his name. A simple name, but for some reason I liked it. I finished up in the kitchen and went to the garage. It was cool in there, smelling of wood and motor oil. Tom was standing at the workbench, fixing something, and when he heard my footsteps, he turned around. Oh, you're here already, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I thought you were still in the kitchen. I'm quick, I replied. What needs to be done? Not much. He pointed to some boxes by the wall. Just sort out what to throw away and what to keep. I can never decide. My wife says I can't bring myself to toss old things. I laughed. Men are always like that, I said. They think every screw might come in handy. What if it does? He smiled, and that light irony in his voice was becoming familiar. We started sorting through the boxes. He told stories about each item: the old baseball glove, the broken flashlight, the kid's bike his daughter had outgrown. I listened, sometimes joked, sometimes just enjoyed his voice and how easy it felt to be together. Are you always like this? He suddenly asked, as we lifted a heavy box onto a shelf together. Like what? I looked at him, trying not to show my excitement. Like, you know a little more than you say? I smiled. Maybe, I replied. I see a lot, but I don't talk much. He looked at me intently, and for a moment, silence hung between us. I felt my heart beating faster. He took a step closer, and I didn't move away. Laura, he said quietly, you know this isn't right, don't you? I know, I replied. But sometimes you want to forget about what's right. He didn't say anything else. He just took my hand, and I didn't pull away. We stood like that for a few seconds, as if deciding whether to go further. Then he leaned in and kissed me. Gently, as if asking for permission. I kissed him back, and everything else happened on its own. Quickly, almost awkwardly, but with a strange trust, as if we both knew this was just for now, just here. When it was over, we dressed in silence. I fixed my hair. He buttoned his shirt. We didn't look at each other, but there was no shame or regret in that silence. Just a light sadness and the understanding that this wouldn't happen again. "Thank you," he said quietly as I was about to leave. "For what?" I asked, smiling. "For reminding me what it's like to feel alive." I didn't answer. I just left the garage, closed the door behind me, and walked down the path to the street. It was warm outside, and I suddenly felt like I could breathe deeply. That day, I walked to the bus stop for a long time, remembering every detail. His hands, his voice, the way he looked at me. I knew we wouldn't meet like that again. I didn't expect a call, didn't hope for more. It was a moment that would stay just between us. I went home, made dinner, helped my son with his homework, talked to my husband about weekend plans. Everything was as usual, but something inside me had changed. I didn't feel guilt or fear, just a strange calm and a gentle sadness. Sometimes people meet just to remind each other that they're still alive. Tom and I were those people. We slept together and forgot. Each of us went back to our own life, with our own secrets and routines. But sometimes, when I walk past the houses on Maple Avenue, I remember that day and smile to myself. Life goes on,